My name is Doris Mold, and I am co-CEO of Annie's Project. Pleased to be with you here with you this evening. Tonight, this is the third of our webinar series in Plain Talk, Crop and Livestock Insurance, and Risk Management Strategies. Tonight, we're going to be talking about using the Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage, the PRF insurance product, to address insufficient rainfall risk. We'd like to thank the Risk Management Agency for awarding Annie's Project a cooperative agreement to be able to put together this series of insurance education materials. And so in addition to this webinar series, there will be a class that will be offered, and that information will be coming out shortly. We have podcasts and other information that is being put together as part of this program. So we're pleased that you're participating along with us, and you can see our website for more information on the other portions of the project as we move forward. And again, this program is brought to you by Risk Management Agency and Annie's Project through award number RMA 23CPT 0013617. And just a little bit before we introduce Jason, just wanted to tell you just a little bit about Annie's Project in case you're not aware. Annie's is a national nonprofit 501c3, and we are dedicated to educating and empowering women in agriculture, and we're celebrating our 22nd year since its founding. Today, the program has educated over 25,000 people across the U.S. and its territories. And even though we follow a women-centered approach in our programming and our methodology, we welcome anyone to participate. So welcome, everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to Krisha Devlin now, and she will take us through to Jason.
Thank you, Doris. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carisha Devlin, co-CEO of Annie's Project, and it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Jason Johnson. Dr. Johnson is an associate professor and extension economist with Texas A&M University and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. He has a BS degree in Ag Economics. His master's is also an Ag Econ. And then he has a PhD in agriculture and applied economics with a minor in family financial planning. Additionally, Jason is a fifth-generation rancher. He owns and operates the family's 1,200-acre cattle operation in Jacksonville, Texas, with his wife and their 3 children. And since 1997, Jason has worked for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, delivering over 1,000 presentations to help Texas farmers and ranchers navigate droughts, floods, volatile commodity prices, supply chain disruptions, changes to farm policy, conservation programs, and estate and succession planning. So as you can see, he is very well versed in the topic that he's going to be talking about tonight, and we're extremely pleased and honored to have him share his expertise with us all. And just one parting comment, Jason wears a lot of hats, and one of them is serving as Vice President of the Annie's Project Board of Directors. And Jason has dedicated many years to Annie's Project, is very passionate about empowering farm, ranch women, anyone who is interested in learning how to better themselves, to make better decisions for their ag business and their families. So Jason, we welcome you and thank you so much for spending time with us this evening.
Thank you, Carisha. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be invited to be part of the series, risk management. I've attended the previous webinars that we've had, and I think they've been very useful. And hopefully this one tonight will be as well. I'm going to cover a topic that I've been covering in my role as an extension economist for Texas A&M and Texas AgriLife since this program was rolled out as a pilot in 2007. I've probably covered this topic 200 times in the state of Texas over that period. And I think what's different about tonight's is I've seen presentations, I've seen this topic presented by people that were purely academics. I've seen the topic presented by crop insurance agents, and they all do a great job of kind of explaining that. What I'm going to do tonight is basically share with you how I approach this particular product as a rancher myself, and how I have used it since the program was started in 2007. I've been an active participant and utilize this program for my own risk management needs on our ranch. There's a million different ways to attack this particular policy, and what you're going to get is just the one that I have found works for me, that I can explain and justify. Hopefully, maybe if nothing else, the approach towards utilizing this as a true risk management tool will be something that you can take, think about, and tweak to make it fit your own needs. So that's the perspective I'm coming from. I'm really, as an educator, I do this all the time. But when I thought about what would be most relevant for this audience, I thought I want to approach this is basically, here's an example of how I use it. And if it makes sense to you, you'll have time to think about utilizing this product and its usefulness in your own operation. So let's face it. I'd like to think after 5 generations, I've learned a few things about running cattle and being a cowboy. But if I'm going to be honest and look myself in the mirror, more often than not, the years that we've had that were good, it's because it rained and the market was good at the same time. The years we had when no matter how smart you were, you just had to survive that particular year. Is a year when it was dry and the market was bad. Everybody lost money. It's those combinations of years when it's dry but the market's good, or you get rain but the market's not so great. Those are the kind of the iffy years. But the one common denominator here, and I think most livestock producers would agree, the biggest risk we face towards profitability is what we get in terms of cooperation from Mother Nature. Rainfall is our biggest risk from a cow calf operator's perspective, and so we haven't had a lot of tools historically as livestock producers to address that. There are a few programs. I know there's a NAP, non-insured ag products policy, that basically allows producers to buy some catastrophic levels of coverage. But what we're going to talk about with this pasture, rangeland, and forage policy is really the first tool that allows you to purchase insurance on the number one risk you face as a producer, and that's insufficient rainfall. So we know that in my particular case, working in the state of Texas, I cover roughly about 1/5 of the state. And you can see this is the most recent drought monitor. Any 1/5 of the state may be in exceptional drought, or it may have no drought. So the perspectives change, and they change over time. But we know, and particularly in my state, if we're not in a drought right now, we will be soon. It won't be too far. That's just the nature of wildcat dry land farming or farming and ranching in the state of Texas. So the drought monitor kind of provides that graphical picture of the backward looking moisture situation, but you can look all over the country. There's a need for a product that addresses insufficient rainfall, and if you're in an area that it doesn't show that, you soon will be. So I figured the best way to illustrate the application and use of this particular policy was basically to walk you through the decision aid tool that RMA provides for you to be able to evaluate this product and to back test it and to think about the strategies the different levers you can pull to adjust the price and adjust the coverage level. There's no easier way to kind of illustrate the application of this product than to walk you through that exact decision support tool that's provided. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do that from my home area, and you can see how you would do it for yours. But the web address, the link that I've got up there, takes you to this picture, which is the opening landing page for this pasture rangeland forage support tool. If you search PRF rainfall insurance in any search box, it'll be the first or second hit that shows up. And what you see is you'll see a map, and there on the top left-hand side, you type in the nearest town to where your particular acreage is located. In my case, that's the small town of Jacksboro, Texas, population of about 3,500. So you type in that nearest town, and then over towards the right-hand side of that page, there's clicks for grid lines and grid labels. And once you type in search, it will pull up this next page. And what you see there is the town of Jacksboro, Texas, and you see these squares. These squares are not county boundaries. These squares are grids. And that's how this product operates. It's insurance for normal rainfall or a percentage of normal rainfall within a particular grid. The PRF insurance, let's start with this, is a single peril insurance. It doesn't matter how much rain you get on your place. It doesn't matter how many cows you have or sheep or goats. None of that matters. It doesn't matter what your yield is, production, your weaning weights. The only thing this policy does is this policy pays on rainfall, a percentage of normal rainfall in your particular grid. So if you look at this map, Jacksboro is there in the center of the page. My operation is actually about 14 miles north of Jacksboro. So I just click on where I follow the map, I follow the roads on the map, and I basically click roughly where my ranch is. And that little bubble there with the little pin, that is where my acreage is located. So what I'm doing is I'm specifying that my acreage is located within grid 16028. So the first thing you do is you identify which grid your acreage belongs in. Now the grids are essentially a quarter of a degree of latitude by a quarter of a degree of longitude. They're not following county boundaries. They're laid out over the entire contiguous US. What that amounts to is roughly at the equator, it would be 17 mile by 17 mile squares. As you move away from the equator, those squares kind of become rectangles, and roughly they're 16, 17 by 13 mile areas. Just for, bearing purposes of what you're looking at, my little hometown of Jacksboro, if you go to the west on this map, you'll see Graham. Graham is located 25 miles away. So there's 3 grids in that route. Bridgeport to the east is 30 miles away. Again, 3 grids away. Bowie in the northeast from Jacksboro is 35 miles. Again, you trek across 3 different grids. So that kind of gives you a feel. Now, this particular policy is what's called a group risk policy. You don't measure rainfall out of your rain gauge. Doesn't matter what rainfall you actually get on your place. The single peril that triggers this insurance is a certain percent of normal rainfall in the grid as a whole. And the keeper of that measurement is NOAA, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And what they use is they use the four most closest weather stations, and they do some interpolation such that every grid is assumed to receive the same, every acre within that grid is assumed to receive the same amount of insurance. You know, and I know well that every place in that particular grid didn't receive the same amount of insurance or same amount of rainfall. But that's the way this is treated. That is the advantage and disadvantage of a group risk policy. You may get the rainfall and the grid may get, credited for only half of it. On the other side, you may not get any rainfall, but if rainfall falls within a certain grid, that grid may be assessed or assigned a quarter of an inch or a half of an inch. It's not a perfect policy, but again, you're not having to track records. And in my experience, it's been pretty darn close when, there's no question if I don't get any rain and there's no rain anywhere in the area, it's not going to say that I did. So it's not a perfect system, but in times when there's widespread drought and prolonged drought, this policy is going to reflect that. So it is a group risk policy. You're basically ensuring a percentage of normal rainfall in the grid in which your acreage resides. And other questions that came up is, what if I pull it up and it looks like my acreage straddles the grid line? And I had that when I first started. I had some acreage that was in grid 16028, and I had some acreage that was across the line in grid 16027. If that acreage is contiguous, you could enroll it all in one grid, all in the other grid, or what I think makes the most sense is you split your acreage and put roughly the percentages in two grids. So you basically have rainfall protection across those lines. So that gives you kind of an indication of where you start. You start with identifying where your location is on the map, what the grid number is. And you'll notice at the very top of this particular screenshot, there's tabs. This decision support tool, that's where we're going to go next. And when you hit that, it's going to recognize the grid for where that pin is located. That pin, my land is in 16028. So when I hit the decision support tool, it's going to pull up that tool, and you'll notice at the very top, it's saying Texas, county is Jack, grid ID is 16028. So now this is where we get into the details of the particular policy and basically how you can tweak it and modify it to fit your own individual needs. So I'm going to just start on the left-hand side of the page of the decision tool. Intended use, grazing or haying. The policy works the exact same way, but there is a policy with premiums and coverages of protection, levels of dollar protection for grazing, and similarly higher value coverage levels and higher cost premiums for haying. And I'll show you that one later. But for now, we're gonna walk through a grazing example. And if you understand that, then you'll understand intuitively how the other one works as well, because it'll work the exact same. So the grazing option from the pull down menu is the one we're going to start with. In my particular case, there is no irrigated grazing, so it skips over that. There's no organic grazing acreage, so it skips over that. When we get to the hay, those options open up. But this is the very first. You'll notice the first option there on the grazing that we're going to look at is coverage level. And on that drop down menu, 90, 85, 80, 75, and 70. This is basically the percent of normal rainfall that you're picking to be the trigger for whether or not you get a payment or whether or not you've had sufficient rainfall. So 90% of normal rainfall is basically the highest level of rainfall you could pick. Anything below that would trigger a payment. You go down to 70% of normal rainfall, you'd have to suffer, 30% plus insufficient rainfall to trigger. So obviously, just like the deductible on a house, you're going to pick the trigger level that basically decides whether or not, when NOAA gathers this information and determines for a 2-month period how much rainfall did my grid get, if it's below the trigger level, I get paid. So just as an example, there's some, if you pick the 90% trigger level, that is subsidized by USDA at 51%, which means USDA is paying 51% of the actuarial cost of that being the trigger. If you go to 80 or 85% of normal rainfall in order to trigger a payment, they will subsidize 55% of the cost of that program. And if you pick 70 or 75%, USDA subsidized 59% of that product. So it's like basically they're paying at least 50% of the true cost of this insurance product. They're subsidizing. That's really important when you think about whether this tool is useful or relevant. If somebody else is going to pay half the true cost of the policy, but you're going to get all of the payments if it's triggered, then it's basically telling you that the program is kind of designed to reward producers for building their own risk management program here. Now, obviously, if I have to wait till I get below 70% of normal rainfall before I get a payment, that's pretty rough. But I can pick whether I want to pay more and have a trigger that triggers sooner, or pay less and suffer the first 25% of the insufficient rainfall on my own. So that's the first of the options that allows us to increase or reduce our coverage level, the premium that we would pay for that policy, and the likelihood of a payout. The next option underneath that, and I'm just going to show you, I pick 85 because personally that's the one I go with. I don't want to wait until I have less than 70% of normal rainfall, but I want to get 85 works for me because I get 55% subsidy on the premium. And if I get below 85% of normal rainfall for my place, then, it's going to trigger a payment. So to me, I'm going to illustrate 85 because that's the one I just personally choose for this policy. The next item down is called the productivity factor. Productivity factor basically means they assign a grazing value by county. In every county, as you move across areas that are more productive, they have a higher grazing value. But in Texas, if you move further out west where it's more arid, the dollar value of grazing is less. But the producer can pick on a scale from 60% of the county average value up to 150% of the county average value for grazing to decide how much they want to insure. And I'll show this again in a different context where it'll make a little bit more sense, but intuitively, obviously, if you pick 150% of the productivity factor, you're saying that you want to insure the county average plus 50%. If you pick 60%, and that's going to be the most expensive of the options based on this criteria. If you go down to 60% productivity factor, you're insuring only a value of 60% of the county average And of course, that would be the cheaper of the options here. So here is what that looks like for my particular county. And I picked the 85% trigger on rainfall and 150% productivity factor. In Jack County, the county base value of grazing is valued at $27.60. If you took $27.60 and multiplied that by 0.85, which is 85%, the coverage level of chosen, and then multiplied that by 1.5, the 150% productivity factor, what you end up with is the dollar amount of protection that I'm choosing in Jack County by selecting an 85% rainfall trigger and 150% productivity factor. Then that's buying me $35.19 per acre of protection. If we did not get any rain in the months that I enrolled, that would be the insurance payment. Obviously, if you increase the coverage level, the payment goes up. If you reduce the productivity factor, that dollar amount of protection would go down, and the premium would fluctuate accordingly. You'll notice that you do have options on that left-hand side. Insurable interest, 100%. If I own the property, it gives you the option if you co-own the property or if you're on some kind of share agreement where if your partner did not want to buy the insurance, you still could at your ownership percentage rate. And then insurable acres, I just put 1,000 acres down just because it'll make the math a lot easier when we look at overall impacts. So you see, choosing that 85% coverage level, as you go down to the policy information, it buys me $35.19 per acre of protection. The total policy protection would be $35,191, which is basically just multiplying that by the 1,000 acres that I'm showing here that I own in the decision aid. It shows the subsidy level, which is 55%. At the 80 and 85% trigger levels, that's what the subsidy is. Okay, then we move to the right-hand side. And let me see here. Yeah, okay, so let me we've looked at each one of these on the left. These are all the toggles and switches and levers that you can adjust. Now we're going to talk about what those entail in terms of costs. Part of that decision aid, the next step is to allocate your acreage across the calendar. In other words, you have to enroll your acreage in alternative 2-month intervals across the calendar. You can't put more than 50% of your acreage in any one interval. You can't overlap intervals in terms of you'll notice here if we enroll in January and February, we can't also enroll in February and March because February would be double covered. So if we pick January and February, the next eligible interval is March and April. We pick March and April, the next interval is May and June. So the point is you have to allocate 100% of your acreage across the calendar. Here's where it gets art versus science, crop insurance agent suggestion versus someone who's actually using this for risk management. You could very easily just enroll 1/6 of your acreage in each of the 6 2-month intervals. In that mentality, and you could do it equally, basically just admitting that you don't know when it might be insufficient rainfall, so you just want to insure everything equally. You'd put 16% plus or 16% in each of the 6 intervals. That's the easy way, and that's probably the most common way that people allocate their acreage. I basically have native unimproved warm season grasses. So when I look at this, I go, I'm going to have grazing or not based on how much rainfall I get primarily in those spring and summer months. Those are the ones that are most important to the production of forages on my unimproved pasture operation. So just personally, what I do is I put the majority of my acreage during those months. You'll notice in this allocation table, protection table, I put 23% of my acreage in March and April, 24% in May and June, and 23% in July and August. In other words, those 6 months, I'm enrolling 70% of my acreage because those are the most critical months to whether or not I produce grazing or not. And if I get insufficient rainfall during that critical period, I want a bigger check. I want a bigger compensation. Now, you'll notice I do put 10% in January and February, 10% in September and October, and 10% in November and December. Basically, I'm enrolling some acreage in every 2-month interval on the calendar, such that if I don't get sufficient rainfall any of those 2-month intervals, I know I'm going to get a payment of some type. But I'm going to be concentrating my risk management tool in those spring and summer months.
So, Jason, for those people that maybe live in the northern fringes of the country who might not have grazing and real grazing in January and February, might have cattle out somewhere, but they aren't truly, getting any fodder off of the land. How would you then propose structuring how they would lay things out compared to you in Texas?
You would certainly, you can enroll 0%. You can leave January and February completely uncovered if you wanted to, and take that percentage weight and put it in the more critical periods. What I see is one of two strategies. You either weight them all equally because you're basically that maximizes the possibility that you get a payment, or you concentrate your enrollment in the months where insufficient rainfall would be the most detrimental to your operation. And of course, you're right to point out that's going to be different in Texas versus different in other areas of the country.
Right.
So but if you leave a 2-month interval uncovered, and we'll see this in my hay example, because that's exactly what I do. What happens is you reduce the probability that you'll get a payment, but you may increase the amount of payment that you get in those months that are most critical to your profitability.
So what you're saying is that even if you're under 4 foot of snow, or maybe you have a very open winter, even though nothing's growing, you can have something allocated during those months. Okay.
You can. And that's where I said it's kind of the art versus the science. Some people I deal with, their main goal is they want to increase the probability that they get a payment of some sort.
Right.
Other people I work with say, I don't care if I don't get a payment unless it hurts me in those critical months. So I want to concentrate my acreage. And you'll see that example on the hay one that I give, because certainly even in Texas, there's periods when rainfall is very darn less important, much less important in certain months for hay production. So I leave that uncovered. I mean, that's fine. In hay production, it is much more important that I collect a bigger check to compensate me from my fertilizer bills that I didn't get any hay off of if I have insufficient rain.
Right.
So thanks for bringing that up, and we'll see a kind of a different slant on it from a risk management perspective on the hay example that I use.
Marvelous. Thank
you. Yes. Okay, so if you'll look at this table, and like I said, this is the strategy that I use. Concentrate my acreage across those spring and summer months. Then I cover everything else. If you look at that total premium, the total premium using an 85% trigger, using 150% productivity factor, and giving me $35.19 worth of grazing protection per acre, that premium would be $6.51. Uncle Sam is subsidizing $3.58 of that, 55%. So I'm left on, my premium would be $2.93 per acre for that policy and that level of protection. Okay, so here's where the real key for this particular product is. So USDA is subsidizing the product over half. I get to pay less than half, but I get all of the payments should we have insufficient rainfall in those 2-month intervals to which I am enrolled. Very big kicker there. So just to kind of blow up, and this was 2024. This was the actual results. And of course, November and December hadn't closed yet. They usually run about 60 days after it closes before they publish the final results. But in January and February, I had 121% of normal rainfall. So there was no payment there. March and April, I had 166% of normal rainfall in my grid for that 2-month period. 165% of what was considered to be normal, no payment. May and June, 111% of normal rainfall, no payment. When we get into the summer, this last summer, July and August, my grid, my ranch, was assessed and said we got 24% of what was normal rainfall for that July-August period, which is pretty darn right close. The estimated indemnity there was $5,700 for the 1,000 acres, or essentially $5.77. In September and October, I keep doing that. September and October, we had 53% of normal rainfall, again triggering a payment because 85% was my trigger. Anytime we got less than 85% of normal rainfall, that triggered a payment. So even without November and December, and I think if I recall correctly, we probably had normal rainfall then. The policy paid $7.10 per acre. Keep in mind that my part of the premium was $2.93. And on this policy, they typically send out the bill to pay the premium. They don't even send it out till like August. So many years I have already accrued enough to pay for the premium before the bill even came out. I think this year I got the bill, I paid the full premium, and then within the next 60 days, they sent me my money back plus some. But just as an example, this was 2024. The payment was $7.10. My part of the premium was $2.93. The net of that was basically money made available to me for insufficient rainfall that I could use for whatever I needed, additional feed, that again, it's a single peril, right? You either get normal rainfall or you don't. And it's either above your trigger level or it's below. And if it's below the trigger level, you get a payment. I don't have to go file a report. I don't have to turn in my head count, my inventory. It's paid based on the rainfall that's assessed to my particular grid that I'm enrolled in, and then the months that I enrolled my acreage across. At the top of the page on that decision tool, it says estimated indemnities. Once I'm in that decision tool, I can put my strategy up there of how I think I want to enroll it, and I can hit estimated indemnities, and I can look going back to 1948, which years that policy would have paid off, how much it would have paid off, and I can kind of backtrack and back test whether I want to enroll equally across the calendar or whether I want to concentrate my acreage in certain months. What I'm going to tell producers is don't waste your time trying to figure out whether there's some pattern of Mother Nature and its rainfall. We go through periods of drought, we go through periods of excess rainfall. It's kind of a random looking deal. take this policy and enroll your acres in months where that are most critical to your profitability. That's using the tool to provide the most benefit when you need it the most, but maybe you pay the premium in years when you can afford it the most. And just as an example of that, this is 20 years in my particular grid. This is the net return per acre above the premium. So remember, we said in 2024, it paid out $7.10. The premium was $2.93. What you see there at $4.17 in 2024 was the net return above the premium. So we've covered the premium. And you see 20-year history, some year, 14 out of the 20 years, I collected a check. 70% of the time. 6 of the 20 years, I owed either all of the premium or part of the premium. That's okay. If you look at examples, 2015, I owed $2.93 per acre by enrolling in this policy. That's the full premium. The only way you owe the full premium is if you got, in my case, above 85% of normal rainfall for each of the 6 2-month intervals in the calendar. Promise you, I'm more profitable in the years that I owe the full premium because I got adequate rainfall through the whole calendar year. You'll notice some years I only owed 43, like 2021, I only owed 43 cents. It means I collected some payments through the year, just not enough to cover that full premium. And then in Texas, 2011 was the drought that will scar ranchers for their entire lives. It was the equivalent of the Dust Bowl for my generation. In 2011, covered the premium and collected a net check of $13.01. I never want to collect a check again that's that high because that was a miserable dry year. I was not near as profitable with that check from insurance as I was in the years where I owed the full premium. And here's just that example, 2015. I owed the full premium. I got 116% of normal the first 2 months, 110% in the 2 months after that, 327% of normal rainfall in May and June, 120% in July and August, 121% of normal in September and October, and 226% in November and December. I probably had more risk of foot rot in a year like that as they waded through grass that was belly high. The downside is, darn it, I owed the full premium on the rainfall insurance. Probably one of the most profitable years that we could have had. The worst case scenario with this insurance is you owe the full premium, and those are the years where you're probably going to be the most profitable. In 2011, that year where I made the most money off the insurance, 29% of normal rainfall, followed by 23% of normal rainfall, followed by 76%, followed by 14%. Then we got wet. September and October had 133% of normal and 106%. I collected $15.94. The premium was $2.93. So obviously the net was $13.01. That's what I made from insurance. That allowed me to buy some really bad hay from a long distance away. But certainly was not very profitable. But hey, that was the consolation prize. And without this kind of insurance, there's very darn little other consolation prizes out there. NAP, you got to suffer a 50% loss in the county before you get anything. This at least triggered some payments to offset some of the additional expenses. And that's what a true risk management product does. Just to kind of illustrate, I talked about adjusting the levers. This is on grazing land. And for each of these scenarios, I used 150% of productivity for my county, the trigger levels of 90% of normal rainfall down to 70%. You can see the corresponding subsidy level for that product, and you see what the producer premium is. So the higher that producer premium and the higher, the 90% 150 has a $3.71 per acre premium, and I get $37 worth of coverage per acre if it didn't rain at all in those enrolled months. If I wanted to go down and lower that trigger to 70%, it wouldn't pay off as much as the 90, obviously. But the subsidy's higher. The premium is only $1.59 per acre, and the dollar coverage of protection I'm buying is $28.98. You don't collect anything unless you get below 70% of normal rainfall in one of those intervals. But you can see here kind of the sliding scale where a producer can increase or reduce their cost and their coverage. Obviously, we could also adjust that productivity factor. And if we wanted to take those same numbers and go down to 100% of productivity, then basically you could lower the premium to 2/3, 66% of the premium and 66% of the dollar coverage would be the result. So you can basically pick and choose the level of coverage you want to pick. But remember, no matter whether you put your foot on the gas on this policy or you go really, really conservative, the odds are stacked in your favor to collect more than you pay in because of the subsidy paid on the premium. One of those rare instances where the odds are stacked in the producer's favor for utilizing the tool. And just so, and I've done, like I said, I've done this 200 times. I just pulled some of the, similar examinations. Nobody believes you unless you run the numbers for their grid. So here's some examples of programs I did in the past where I basically did the same analysis. 89%, let's go to, Jack County. Over the 20 years, the net above the premium was $2.40 per acre. That's after paying the premium. That's what I netted out. So this policy is basically giving me nearly an 82% rate of return on my investment over that 20-year period. My bank doesn't pay a rate of return that high, and it certainly doesn't pay me in years when it's dry. So that's the rate of return on investment I've had in Jack County. When I look at some of the other counties around and scattered across the state, Wise County, same exact scenario. They have basically the same coverage level, 90% return on investment over a 20-year period. Now, there's a couple of years there where they owed some premium. And that's where a producer says, hey, I did what you said, and I owed money 2 years in a row, so I quit. Well, that's certainly possible. But if you stick with something that's stacked in your favor, when the odds are stacked in your favor, the longer you participate, the more likely you're going to be rewarded accordingly. 89% return on investment in this county over 20 years. 60% return on investment above the premium over 20 years. Another county, 61%. So what you see is it's very, obvious with the subsidy that's provided for this as a risk management tool. It is designed to pay out more than it brings in. So we've gone through that grazing land example. I'm going to show you hay very, very quickly because it works identically. On hay land, and this is Jack County, instead of grazing land, we pick hay. We have the option to pick non-irrigated or irrigated. I just chose non. Organic, non-organic, or transitional. Now, in hay, I picked the same 85% coverage level, which means I'm going to get a 55% subsidy on the premium. But I lowered the productivity factor down to 100% just to make the policy a little bit more palatable in terms of costs. Again, 100% insurable interest. I put 100 acres for this, for example. For hay, the county base value is $181 per acre. In this example, if you multiply that by 0.85, That's going to give you, and then 100% productivity factor. So you multiply it by 1, you get $153.85 per acre of protection. If it did not rain in that intervals in which you enroll, that would be your check. $153.85. So it works the same. The stakes are just higher for hayland because it's worth more value wise. Now, the one thing again, you could enroll equally across the calendar, but for hay, notice what I suggest to people is I put 30% in March and April, 30% in May and June, 30% in July and August, and 10% in September and October. And I leave November and December and January, February unenrolled because rainfall during those months is not going to have much impact on my hay production. And by putting 90% of my production, 90% of my enrollment in the March through the end of August period, what that does is if I do not get rain, sufficient rain, if I don't get at least 85% of normal rainfall for those 2-month intervals, I'm going to get a much larger check, which will help compensate me for money that I spent on herbicide and fertilizer where I did not get a return of that investment because I didn't produce enough hay. So grazing, I cover the whole calendar. But with hay, it's so important because the stakes are so high and expenses have been outlaid. I'm perfectly comfortable leaving some months uncovered so that I get compensated if those critical, profitable, profitability months suffer insufficient rain. So going back to what Doris raised, this is where you kind of tailored the product to fit the true risk management risks, the rainfall risks that you have on your own operation. Following that same methodology, and again, we're leaving 4 months completely uncovered. So what that does is in the same grid, instead of 14 out of 20 years positive, now we're down to 12. Only 60% of the time did we collect a check above the premium. That's the trade-off we exchange by leaving some months uncovered. But the payoff that we get from that is in those months that are critical to determining whether we produce hay or not, we're going to get the maximum check if rainfall is not up to that 85% level. So looking at the 20-year history above the premium, and the premium on that 85, 100% productivity factor, premium was $12.11. The subsidy, Uncle Sam paid $14.83 of it, and I got a coverage level of $153.85. You'll notice there are 4 years there where I owed $12.11. I owed the full premium in those years. That means I got above 85% of normal rainfall in March, April, May, June, July, August period where I was enrolled. And if I get above normal rainfall there, I'm going to make a hay crop. The worst part of that is, by darn, I owe $12.11. Here's that owed the full premium scenario, a 2016, 207% of normal, 150% of normal, 187% of normal, and 120% of normal rainfall during the hay producing months. Darn, I owed $12.11. 2011, again, the same bad year for grazing was a bad year for hay too. Collected $77.38 per acre minus the premium. So I netted out at 50 something dollars or $65. But the downside was I only had 23%, 76%, 14%. And then at the very end of the year, I actually had 133% of normal rainfall. Probably didn't make a whole lot of hay there. And certainly not enough to where that $50, $60 worth of payment made me whole. but it's a heck of a consolation prize. It at least allowed me to recuperate some of my expenses. And again, the same sliding scale, this time just looking at the productivity factor of 100%. If the rainfall trigger of 90%, subsidized at 51%. The premium $16, and you buy $162 worth of coverage. You could go down to 75% trigger, subsidized at a higher level. You only have a $7.83 premium and $136 of protection. So you can pick and choose the level of coverage. What I tell producers is, if you enroll in the program and you're mad because you owed the full premium, then you need to think about what the program's designed for, and maybe you adjust your exposure. I go into the program every year hoping I owe the full premium, because the only way that I'm going to do that is if that means I had sufficient rainfall all through the year. And I would take that every year. Just to throw this out, and I know this will be irrelevant right now, but they have a similar product for producers that are in these 7 states, where you actually do the exact same thing for annual forages, not just hayland and grazing land. And on those annual forages, you can do the same Google search, RMA's annual forage rainfall insurance. There's a couple of different growing seasons where you do the same selection of productivity factor and coverage level on rainfall, but you allocate your acreage across shortened periods of the year. Growing season 1, growing season 2, 3, and 4, just designed to allow producers in those 7 states to ensure for sufficient rainfall in an abbreviated growing season that may match up to a crop that's an annual instead of a perennial, like grazing or hay. So conclusions that I have here, to me, there's a difference between risk management and gambling. When you go to the casino in Vegas and you step up to the roulette wheel, there's, what is that, 18 black, 18 red, and 2 green. So if you pick red or black, the odds are stacked against you because of those 2 green. The longer you play, the more likely you're going to lose money. With this particular tool, the fact that someone else is paying over half of the premium on your behalf, the odds are stacked more in your favor, actually in your favor. So that the longer you participate, the higher the odds are that that particular policy will add to your bottom line. And from a risk management standpoint, it addresses one and only one peril, and that's rainfall, which is the number one risk you face, or as I face as a livestock cow-calf producer, or the number one risk I would face as a hay producer. So with the odds stacked in your favor, the longer you can go in any 1 year, any 2 years, any 3 years, you could have a string of bad luck, meaning that you got good rainfall 3 years. And you'd say, Jason, you cost me all this premium money. That's possible. But what I'm saying is over the long term, because the odds are stacked in your favor, the longer you participate in this program, the higher the probability that it's going to end up paying you more than you paid in. You can choose the level of protection or premiums that make sense, adjusting those levers between a 90% rainfall trigger and a 70% rainfall trigger. A 150% of county average versus 60% allows you to adjust the coverage levels and the premiums that you're exposed to. The subsidy levels run from 51 to 59%. It's a group risk policy, for better or worse. It's not the rainfall you actually get on your field. It's the rainfall assigned on that grid. But it is a consolation prize in very, very dry years when there are very few consolation prizes to that situation. You will owe the full premium in years when you get sufficient rainfall in all of those intervals in which you enroll. And You can also participate in USDA's NAP program simultaneously. The logic there is a little weird. The PRF is a single peril, which is insufficient rainfall, whereas NAP on grazing is insufficient forage. And while you and I both know that insufficient forage growth is probably the result of insufficient rainfall, they don't consider them to be double covering. So you can do both policies. USDA NAP will be a catastrophic level, and the payments are always much delayed from when the actual event occurred. The PRF insurance is much more timely in terms of the payments or the credits get assessed to your account, 60, 90 days. Many times you will have earned enough credits to where you don't even owe a premium by the time August comes for that particular year. Check with where you get this insurance, and this is where a lot of livestock producers are not as familiar, is you purchase that from anyone anybody who sells federal crop insurance policies, traditional crop insurance policies, can sell this policy. It's a federal product, so it's not cheaper at one place versus the other. You go buy it with the crop insurance agent where you're going to get the best service. In terms of policy enrollment deadlines, anywhere from the end of November to the middle of December is the enrollment deadline for the following year. So the next time, if you're not already in this program, the next time you could enroll would be for 2026. And the deadline for doing that would be, like I said, 1st of December to the middle of December. And you'd want to get with your crop insurance agent and let them kind of run some scenarios for you. Run your own scenarios to the decision aid so that you can decide what level of insurance you would like or what level of protection you're trying to achieve. So with that, like I said, I hope the illustration of how I utilize this personally as a livestock producer gives you some idea on different ways you could approach this and tailor it to fit your particular operation.
We'll just ask if there's any questions anyone has before we let Jason go this evening.
My email's up there too. So if anybody thinks of something later on or wants to question or challenge any of this, by all means, do it. Send me an email. I'm more than happy to have a discussion because, like I said, I'm presenting one man's approach, and that may, if you want to give me some more details about your particular situation, maybe I can help you tweak what I would do to make it more relevant for you. Any question, anytime, more than happy to entertain those because I truly want people to make decisions based on a strong perspective. And so happy to help out anytime, anywhere.
Thank you very much, Jason. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and expertise with us this evening. Just want to remind everyone that if you haven't signed up for the remainder of the webinar series, you can go to anniesproject.org and it's all up there. You can sign up for our upcoming sessions. Next Tuesday, we'll be covering livestock insurance with Tim Christensen from Iowa State. And then we also have one more evening session after his, and then we'll have 2 lunch and learns as part of this webinar series. So we really appreciate you being with us and hope to have you join us on another session. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you.